This is my lazy, fat daughter." The words echoed through the ballroom like a bell at a funeral. My father delivered them with a smirk, the same one he had worn my whole life whenever he found a fresh way to belittle me. Guests responded with polite laughter. The shallow, kind people used to blend in, even when it's cruel. I felt their eyes burn into me, mocking, until the floor itself seemed unsteady beneath my shoes. Then it happened. 4 young men in matching tuxedos, groomsmen near the head table, exchanged a quick look. One of them spoke clearly. "Sir." The other 3 finished his sentence in unison. "She's our commanding officer." Their words rang sharp, cutting through the laughter like a trumpet. The room froze. My father choked mid-sip, spraying wine across the tablecloth. He coughed and sputtered, face draining of color, as it sank in the daughter he had ridiculed before 200 wedding guests was the same woman. These men stood ready to salute. From that instant, the wedding turned on its head. I had known this day would test me. Weddings are meant to be joyful, but for me it felt like another battlefield. My only son, Mark, was marrying into the Hastings family, an old Virginia name with wealth and history stretching back to the Civil War. The reception took place at their grand country club, chandeliers glittering overhead, waiters moving silently with silver trays. The entire setting seemed designed for judgment. I dressed with care. Navy blue, simple, understated. Around my neck, a strand of my late mother's pearls. I had learned long ago that blending in was safer than standing out, especially near my father. At 72, he had grown sharper, his jokes more cutting. He thrived on attention, even when it came at someone else's expense, and more often than not, that someone was me. From my teenage years, he had branded me with names: big girl, useless, slow. I survived by shrinking into the background, while my brothers, leaner, louder, won his favor. I carried the weight of his disappointment the way I carried medals on my uniform, silently, without asking for recognition. What he never realized was that invisibility could be a shield. I enlisted at 19. He thought it was a phase, that I'd never survive the first deployment. Instead, I discovered myself. Discipline became my language. Resilience, my armor. His ridicule forged steel inside me. I rose through the ranks, serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, and across the states. My soldiers knew me as Major Carter, then Lieutenant Colonel Carter, and finally Colonel Carter, by the time of my son's wedding. But my father never asked, and I never told if he couldn't be proud. I stopped giving him the chance to reject me. At family dinners, I wore civilian clothes, never mentioning deployments, ribbons, or command. To him, I was only the disappointment he tolerated. Mark had been with Jennifer Hastings just over a year. She was sharp, ambitious, a corporate lawyer polished by privilege. Her family welcomed Mark warmly, though I saw the appraising looks, measured dress, modest jewelry, small-town accent. The same look I'd known all my life. When Jennifer introduced me to her parents, I braced myself. Their politeness was thin, but nothing prepared me for my father stepping forward, chest puffed, declaring the words that still sting: "This is my lazy, fat daughter." The laughter that followed was the worst part. Not universal, but enough. Laughter is contagious. Even when people don't mean it, they join in rather than stand silent. My face burned, my heart raced. I wanted to run. I wanted to shout the truth, but I didn't need to. My soldiers did it for me. The groomsmen had served under my command in Afghanistan. I hadn't known they'd be there. They'd befriended Mark without revealing their connection to me, out of respect. But when they heard my father's words, they decided enough was enough. "Sir, she's our commanding officer." The phrase struck like a hammer. Laughter vanished. Guests stared at them, then at me. My father sputtered, wine dripping from his chin. For the first time in decades, the weight shifted. I wasn't exposed, he was. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I stood still, letting truth hang in the air. My soldiers looked at me with the same respect they always had. Respect my father never gave. The orchestra faltered. Glasses clinked in the silence. The Hastings family's composure cracked, and Mark looked at me as though truly seeing me for the first time. It wasn't just the end of a cruel joke, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Humiliation rarely happens all at once. It's patient. It trains you, inch by inch, to shrink until you're nearly erased from your own life. I grew up on a two-lane road outside Chillicothe, Ohio, where neighbors knew the price of hay and the mileage of every truck. My father ran a plumbing and HVAC shop behind our house. His shirt smelled of copper and furnace dust. He was skilled with systems, but harsh with people, especially his own family. If a pipe leaked, he fixed it. If a child hurt, he mocked it. That was his way. By 5th grade, I was big enough for the jokes to land. My mother tried to shield me with casseroles and kindness, the way women of her generation mended everything with food and apologies. She loved me openly, while he cut me down publicly. Those forces canceled out until I felt like nothing. On Sundays, we sat under stained glass in church. The preacher spoke of grace. Afterward, my father shook his hand, praising the sermon. Then in the parking lot, he'd grip my arm, testing like fruit, and say, "Laying off donuts this week, right?" Men laughed. Women looked away. Humiliation thrives in parking lots. I learned invisibility was survival. If I couldn't be pretty, I could be useful. I stocked parts in the shop, swept floors, balanced the books. He depended on my neatness, but ridiculed my body. Once he told me, in front of a supplier, "You'd be perfect if you came with a shut-off valve." I pretended not to hear. In high school, I ran cross-country in oversized shirts. My times were average, but I cherished the private victory of steady pace. A counselor once slid me an army brochure. "You stater organized and stubborn," she said. "That stell take you far." At dinner, I mentioned it. My father laughed, chewing with his mouth open. "You'll quit the first time someone yells? You can't even handle a hill run." My mother stayed silent. Silence was safest in our house. I signed enlistment papers in secret and left without fanfare. As I boarded the bus, he told me, "Try not to embarrass us." I didn't look back. Training was harsh, but for the first time fairness ruled. The Army cared only if my boots were shined, my bunk tight, my time faster, that I could handle. Deployment followed. Iraq first. The relentless heat, sand in every letter home. Then Afghanistan. The punishing mountains, soldiers who would trust you only if you proved trustworthy yourself. I learned 1,000 practical skills: reading maps by red light, listening without judgment, leading without pretense. At home, I kept my letters neutral. "I'm well. The cow is fine. The sunsets are beautiful." I left out commendations, promotions, sacrifices. Easier to balance the family ledger by not writing myself in at all. Rank came slowly. Then all at once, captain. Major, lieutenant colonel. I learned to hold steady when someone mistakenly called me sir. In rooms full of men, I spoke low and precise. The words carried farther than volume. There is a kind of authority that doesn't need to be announced. It exists quietly, refusing to be overlooked. When my mother's heart failed, I flew home still in my Class A uniform, because there was no time to change. At the funeral, the same pews lined the aisle, and the stained glass still poured wheat and water across the floor. Women I'd known since childhood pressed my hands and told me, "Your mama bragged about you all the time." My father shook the preacher's hand and said, "She was a good woman," as if he were commenting on a furnace that had finally worn out. On the church steps, a neighbor asked about my uniform. Before I could answer, my father replied, "Just office work. She files papers and avoids breaking a sweat." I took the dish of macaroni someone handed me and went inside. After that, I stopped bringing uniforms home. I wore jeans and cardigans that made me look like a school secretary. My father always wanted me smaller, and I complied in the one way I could, by becoming less visible. The less he knew, the less he could use. When medals appeared that reminded me of moments I'd rather not revisit, I tucked them away. I told myself that heroism didn't need an audience. Years later, when I took command of a battalion, the responsibility felt natural, like a tool I'd held all my life. My soldiers were a mix of America itself: farm kids, first-generation graduates, a baker from Louisiana who could break down a radio blindfolded, a kid from Queens who recited psalms before patrols. They didn't need me thin, they needed me steady. In that steadiness, I found dignity. Meanwhile, my father's shop aged with rust, but still found some success. He bragged about my brother's promotions and sent photos of new trucks. At Christmas, he carved the ham while reciting his aches like medals. "You should lose some weight," he said, between servings. "It's not healthy." I wanted to tell him about the rucks I'd carried, the nights I'd measured fear in teaspoons and still completed the mission. Instead, I passed the rolls and asked for salt. Winning with him meant not playing at all. When Mark was born, my father smiled at his grandson, in a way I had never seen him smile at me. I didn't resent it. Infants are safe from comparison. As my son grew, I practiced a different kind of parenting: praise without conditions, boundaries without cruelty. When his father left, I carried 2 jobs and kept our home orderly, because order brings relief when life is loud. Mark learned to tighten a faucet and make his bed in the same week. I told him strength isn't loud and power isn't cruel. When he brought home report cards, I pinned them to the fridge, without turning them into judgments of his worth. Somewhere between deployments and school pickups, I made a promise to myself. I would stop chasing a role I had already lost. My father's favorite. Favor is weather. Respect is climate. I couldn't control his weather, but I could build my own climate. The years passed in silence, chosen, disciplined, sometimes lonely, but safer. I wore rank where it mattered and left it at the door at home. In my small town, where people counted each other's portions, I learned to count my own breaths and call it enough. Then Mark fell in love, and the wedding invitation felt like an inspection notice from the universe. Family gathers at milestones the way dust settles in corners you forget to check. I knew that ballroom would test me. I didn't expect it to break me. But I no longer needed my father's measure. I carried my own. The Hastings Country Club lot gleamed with cars that all seemed to have names: S-Class, Range Rover, Escalade, lined like prize steers. Inside, the foyer smelled of lemon polish and old money. A teenage attendant in a tuxedo pointed me toward the coat check with 2 fingers and a practiced smile. I thanked him, but kept my wrap. Even though the air was warm, habit teaches you not to set down what you might need if the room turns. The ballroom was a shade decorators call champagne, and carpenters call good paint. Round tables in white linen, a velvet-draped bandstand, a dance floor polished to a nervous shine, every detail accounted for. Calligraphed place cards, centerpieces of roses and eucalyptus, signature cocktails at the bar with the couple's names. You can tell a family by their bar menu. The Hastings had a Hastings old-fashioned top-shelf bourbon with house cherry syrup. Tradition, but only the expensive kind. Jennifer looked radiant. Lace that wasn't fussy, heels she walked in without effort, hair styled to look natural. When she saw me, she moved smoothly through the crowd, her smile trained but warm. "You look lovely, Emily," she said. I nodded and told her the truth. "So do you?" Because both could be true. Kindness in one breath, dismissal in another. Character isn't weather, it's a map of choices, and I had learned how to navigate. The Hastings guests wore that country club casualness, friendly from afar, appraising up close. I caught glances at my dress, my shoes, polished but plain, my hair pulled back simply. "That's Mark's mother," I overheard. "She looks practical." Practical is the word used when plain feels impolite. I've been called worse. My father arrived late, as he always did when punctuality would show respect. His suit was too shiny, his tie too loud. He kissed my cheek, leaving aftershave and menthol on my skin. "Don't cry," he said. "Mascara runs." Not advice, just a reminder that your face can betray you in public. The ceremony was simple and honest. The pastor kept to love and duty, avoiding jokes that cheapen sacred words. Mark's hand trembled as he placed the ring on Jennifer's finger, and I loved him for it. Love should shake you a little, or you're not paying attention. When they kissed, I felt my mother's presence like a hand on my shoulder. During photos, I drifted to the edge of the lawn, watching staff push lemonade carts under the oaks. Weddings are logistics, timelines, backups, redundancies. Thinking of the day as a mission plan calmed me. At 2 o'clock, move guests from chapel to ballroom. At 2:15, serve hors d'oeuvres. At 2:30, announce the wedding party. Details anchor the unsolvable, which is why I grew good at my work. The reception opened with applause, napkins waving, the band sliding into a familiar tune. I was seated with couples who played golf with the Hastings. "We never miss nine and dine," one woman said. Her husband added, "Same 4 jokes every week," and the table laughed. Small talk fills space we haven't figured out yet. We discussed weather, roast beef, flight prices. When they asked what I did, I gave the lighter version: administrative work, planning. Not false, but not the whole truth. Most people want a story they can set down easily. I handed them one. The groom's side filled their half with bankers, lawyers, and local officials holding soft power. The bride's grandmother wore a brooch worth a small college. The flower girl, bored after scattering petals, invented a game rescuing napkin rings from an imaginary flood. To her, the room was a river. To me, it was a field. I noticed the groomsmen at the bar, not because they were loud, but because they weren't. There's a quiet in men who have carried weight together. A way of standing without scanning. One had a scar near his temple. Another wore his watch on the opposite wrist. Details that matter if the night turns. Details my father would never see, because they weren't about appearances. By the time salads cleared and prime rib arrived with horseradish cream, announced like dignitaries, the noise had thickened into the usual polite roar. Someone clinked a glass for a toast, the band hit a wrong note and recovered. A toddler broke free from a booster seat and was wrangled like a calf. It was an American wedding, ordinary in the ways that matter. And then my father stood. I felt the shift before he spoke. He drew himself up the way men do before stepping into a moment they create for themselves. He hadn't been asked to speak. I knew because Jennifer planned every detail and the coordinator shook her head from the sidelines. He didn't notice. He never had when the sign said yield. He tapped his glass with a knife until the chatter softened and faces turned toward him. Faces in the crowd didn't know him well enough to anticipate what was coming. "Folks," he began, "I just want to say a word about family." I could have finished the next lines for him. They were the same ones he used at graduations, funerals, and company events. He always opened with a joke, because jokes give him cover. If you object, you can't take a joke. If you laugh, you become part of it. It's an easy trick if you don't mind buying power at someone else's expense. He thanked the Hastings for hosting, made a crack about the fancy food, and joked that in our house this many forks was a problem. The laugh he got steadied him. Then he gestured toward Mark and said he was proud. True enough, but when his hand shifted to me, I felt the air change. "This," he said, "is my lazy fat daughter." The words weren't new, only their audience was. I'd heard worse from him, at a gas pump, in the grocery store, on church steps, but words into a microphone travel further. I stayed still. If your face doesn't move, sometimes time doesn't either. Laughter broke like hail. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to sting. Jennifer's mother clutched her necklace, unsure if it was shock or etiquette failing. A cousin coughed to hide a grin. At my table, the golf husbands studied their plates. My son stared at his water glass, caught between being a good son and a good man. I didn't answer. Some fights are won by leaving them unfed. Out of the corner of my eye, the groomsmen shifted. Not like soldiers, not yet, but like men weighing whether to act. The one with the scar leaned to the one with the watch, who shook his head. Not yet. Intervention has timing. You wait until the harm is clear to everyone. My father wasn't finished. Bullies rarely are. He launched into a story about me at 12, a fundraiser, and how I supposedly ate 3 hot dogs. Big M, bottomless pit, he said. Wrong details, but accuracy wasn't the point. Control was. I looked at my hands resting on the linen. The same hands that had cleaned a rifle last month, signed a promotion order, held my son through fevers. My father didn't care. Someone at the head table tried to redirect. Let's toast the bride and groom, the planner's assistant called. My father brushed it off. Enjoying the ripple of obliging laughter, I could see the damage coming. Then, across the room, the groomsmen's eyes found mine. Not for permission, just for alignment. I gave the smallest nod. They set their glasses down. No salute, no show, just words spoken together, steady and measured. Sir, she sips our commanding officer. It wasn't loud, but it cut clean. The room split before and after. My father blinked, off balance. Someone gasped. A waiter froze mid-pour. A bracelet chimed against glass. My father tried to grin, then swallow, and failed at both. Wine sprayed across the white tablecloth. The tall groomsman, Staff Sergeant Miller, kept his voice even. With respect, sir. Mom led us in Coast Province. We'd prefer you speak of her accordingly. Prefer. A tidy word, but final. The band stopped pretending to cover. Silence held. Teenagers drifted back, like flocks sensing danger. Jennifer's mother clutched her necklace again, as if it were a rosary. The room looked for a place to put its hands. Commanding, my father muttered. Miller didn't answer with rank, but with memory. Convoy Bravo, June. Comms failed. She went vehicle to vehicle. She's the reason Lewis got home to teach his daughter to ride a bike. His jaw worked once, steadying his voice. She seps our CO, added the scarred one. Corporal Dotto, before asking quietly, permission to clarify? I nodded. Go ahead. He looked at my father. Sir, you don't have to like us, but you will respect her. Not tough, just true. And truth carries weight no bully can lift. My father stared at me, searching for a script. For once, there wasn't one. He dabbed at the wine stain as though that was the problem. Well, he muttered to no one, then to everyone. At the head table, the best man lowered his glass. The joke he'd prepared lost. Jennifer looked between the groomsmen and me, calculation giving way to something like awe. Her father wore a stiff smile that didn't fit. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered Colonel, and the word spread faster than fact-checking. I didn't confirm or deny. I let the room correct its own arithmetic. The planner, quick and brave, clapped once. Let's welcome our newlyweds, she said, pushing sound where silence had broken. Applause followed, thin but serviceable. People were too busy rearranging what they thought they knew. I could have explained the rank I left off the holiday table, the choice of privacy over performance, the difference between humility and hiding. But a good officer knows when not to brief. I stayed silent, letting their eyes do the work. Miller edged closer to his men, a quiet assurance that if gravity failed, they'd hold. Dotto's scar caught the light like a star. The watch on the left hand ticked on, steady as ever. Then my son stood, chair legs, scraping the parquet. He looked at his hands, then at me, then at the men who had shifted the room. "Mom," he said, steady and simple, "the first honor that mattered." My father reached for bluster. "Just a joke," he said, but it rang hollow. Miller answered, not loud but final, "Sir, that was enough." Power doesn't thunder when it shifts. It relocates quietly, absolutely, from those who abuse it to those who won't. You could feel it settle. A glass fell. One of the small water ones, breaking cleanly like expensive things do. Someone near the bar choked on a laugh. They tried to smother. Laughter had become dangerous. That's the start of manners. "Jennifer," her mother whispered, tight, "why didn't you tell us?" "Because it wasn't my story," Jennifer said. "And because we didn't ask. Wealth doesn't keep you from learning." The room discovered. The band chose a hymn tune in jazz form, strong enough to carry the weight. People sat. Toddlers resumed their game by the dance floor. Life, which had paused, moved forward again. "Ma stam," Dotto said softly, like we were in a hallway, not a ballroom. "We got your six." "I know," I answered. My father looked at me and found no daughter he recognized. He had mistaken endurance for emptiness, silence for weakness. Recognition rose in him like weather, then passed. He set his jaw, lifted his knife, and tried to return to dinner. His hand shook just enough to catch the candlelight. The planner approached me then, smiling with the practiced care of someone who knows when mercy is needed most. She leaned in and whispered, "We sepper moving to toasts. Would you like to say something?" The question shifted the room from spectacle to silence. I felt every eye guessing what I might do with the microphone. I could use this moment for payback. I had both an audience and a score to settle, but training lasts longer than anger. When soldiers step in because a father forgets how, you remember who you answer to. I walked to the small platform, adjusted the mic, and let the feedback pass. "Thank you," I said first to the groomsman. "Gratitude is the right opening. It decides the kind of story you tell." Then I faced the room. I sept not here to correct anyone. Sep's biography. I sept am here to celebrate two people who chose each other. I looked at Mark and Jennifer. Marriage is the art of honor in close quarters. You don't need perfection, just truth, especially when lying would be easier. My eyes passed over my father without stopping. Mercy doesn't audition. "In my work," I continued, "we say quiet professionalism. Do the hard things, speak softly, and get your people home." I raised my glass. Here sits to two good people getting each other home. The room rose in waves, like a decision reached without words. Glasses lifted, the pianist struck a brighter note, and a waiter cleared the ruined cloth with the precision of a medic. My father didn't stand, but he stayed quiet. Sometimes progress is subtraction. As applause faded, the band shifted to dance music. People moved because movement is what humans do after remembering gravity. The groomsmen melted back into tuxedos and polished shoes. Dotto's nod carried history no one else could read. Miller gave the small smile of a man who had seen a comrade hold steady at the right time. I breathed out. The air felt earned. The night still held negotiations and small braveries, but its shape had changed. Power had returned, not to me, but to the truth. The applause ended, but silence lingered like humidity before a storm. Guests picked up forks, as if the roast beef mattered, but the rhythm of dinner was broken. Laughter doesn't grow back quickly. Once strangled, I sat without ceremony. The groomsmen blended back into the current, neat and full again, but the shift they caused remained. The Hastings family, who had staged the evening like a play, now wore the faces of people realizing they'd been cast in someone else's tragedy. Jennifer's mother dabbed her lips, as if erasing words she hadn't spoken. Her father fiddled with cufflinks, eyes darting between me and my father. My son Mark squeezed Jennifer's hand beneath the table, holding on to the only real thing in a counterfeit room. My father fussed over the stain on his shirt, pouring water on a napkin as if the wine was the problem, not the sentence that spilled it. He muttered about a joke gone wrong, but no one laughed this time. Whispers spread like smoke. Colonel, Afghanistan. Convoy. People don't need details. They want headlines. And the headline was enough. The woman mocked had already carried more than most of them ever would. A young cousin, bold with champagne, leaned toward me. "Is it true? Were you really over there?" Her voice was part awe, part gossip. I chose kindness over spectacle. "Yes," I said simply. "And so were many better than me." She sat back, chastened. Sometimes humility cuts sharper than pride. The band began a waltz, but the floor stayed empty. No one wanted to pretend normal had returned. My father chewed each bite like it had betrayed him. The groomsmen, relaxed again, spoke quietly among themselves, but now their presence was undeniable. They weren't just friends of the groom, they were proof. When formal toasts began, the best man stumbled. Jokes that worked on paper collapsed under the weight of the evening. He skipped them. The maid of honor cried halfway through her speech, and no one minded. Sentiment was safer than humor now. Then the mic came to me. I hadn't planned to speak. I never do. But silence can become complicity, and I'd lived too many years in silence. I rose, let the room wait. I wasn't planning a toast, I said, but life doesn't always follow a plan. A ripple of soft laughter spread. Human, not cruel. Marriage isn't about perfection. It's about honor in close quarters, about truth when lying is easier, about respect, especially when it's hardest to give. I lifted my glass. Here sips to Mark and Jennifer. May you always honor each other, not just in the easy moments, but in the hard ones. The room stood, applause rising without hesitation. This time, it wasn't for me. It was for the reminder that dignity can be practiced, even learned in real time. My father didn't clap. He stared at his plate, jaw tight, but he stayed silent. And in our family, that was progress. Later, during the first dance, I stepped back. A woman touched my arm. "Thank you for your service," she whispered. Eyes bright. I nodded, unable to answer. Praise feels strange after years spent hiding like light in a darkened room. By the time the cake was cut and the floor filled, the story had already traveled. Strangers approached with questions, gratitude, curiosity. Some wanted details. I gave none. Some just wanted a handshake. I gave all. But the only eyes I wanted were my father's, and he avoided them. He slipped out early, muttering about traffic. His empty chair said more than words. I didn't chase him. For the first time, I knew I didn't need his recognition. The truth had already stood for me. And when truth stands, the room must follow. The morning after, the house smelled of coffee and wilted flowers. Vases crowded the counter, each bloom bowing like it had stayed awake too long. I stood at the sink, mug in both hands, and watched a sparrow chase a blue jay from the feeder. The sparrow won. Size is a poor predictor of victory. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, unsure whether to congratulate or console. "Proud of you. Sorry about your dad. Did that really happen?" I set the phone face down. Truth didn't need replies. Mark called around 9. We were driving to the lake for 2 days. Jen Sepp's folks rented a cabin. "You okay?" "I am," I said. And I meant it. I could breathe without counting. "Enjoy your honeymoon sprint." He hesitated. "Mom last night. Thank you for not lighting anyone on fire." "I wasn't the one who saved the room," I said. "A few good men did." "They said you saved them first," he answered quietly. After we hung up, I wrote Jennifer a short note. "Thank you for your answer. It wasn't your story to tell. By noon, the town had already processed the event the way small towns do, quickly, loudly, with witnesses. At the diner, the waitress slipped an extra slice of bacon on my plate without comment. At the hardware store, an older man cleared his throat at the end of an aisle and said, "Ma'am," like it was a flag. I nodded back. Some handshakes don't need hands. My father didn't call, not the next day either. On the third day, I walked to his shop. The roll-up door was half open, the smell of oil and cardboard thick as always. A radio played old country, soft enough to deny it. He sat at the bench with a pencil over a ledger, pressing numbers into place. He didn't look up when I entered. "Use set or open," I said. "Always," he answered. I set down the socket. "Set I had borrowed, I marked the ones that were yours." He grunted. "Our language for thanks." "I thought we should talk," I said. "We talked enough Saturday," he muttered. "No," I said. "You talked. Others did." I sipped like to speak now. He placed the pencil down carefully, like setting a fuse. "If this is about your big moment, it's steps about the small ones," I said. "Parking lots, church steps, dinners." He flinched, not from forgetting, but from remembering. Silence held us like rope. A box fan rattled every fifth turn. Finally, he said, "It was a joke." "Jokes should be funny to the one who hears them," I replied, "not just the one who tells them." He took it like a jab, rubbing his jaw, as if it had landed for real. People laughed, then stopped. "That's the part I want you to remember," I said. His eyes shifted toward the radio, as if the right song could defend him. When none came, he tried another route. "You never said what you do. You never told me. You never asked," I replied. "You filled the blanks with the story you preferred." He sniffed. "The military is just a job." "It is," I said. "And so is fatherhood." That one struck. He looked back at the ledger. "I gave you what I had. You gave me the part of you that mocks what you can set control. And you withheld the part that names what is good and lets it stand," I said. He tapped his fingers. Once, twice. "So what do you want? An apology?" "I want you to stop," I said. "Not just the big performances. The small cuts, the way you say set big girl seps when you mean set beneath me. Set big, I want you to stop buying power with my dignity." He stared, and for a moment I saw the man I knew when I was 5, handing him wrenches while he taught me the names of tools, Phillips, flathead, crescent, as if language itself could fix anything. He looked older than he had under the chandeliers, maybe because here there was no stage light to protect him. "What if I can't?" he said. It wasn't defiance. It was a confession. "Then we still see less of each other," I said. "I won set bring myself where I sit not respected, and I won set bring my son." He nodded once, sharply, like measuring. "You got hard," he said, almost with admiration. "I got clear," I answered. He thumbed the ledger. "And if I say I sit am sorry?" "Then you sit sorry, and we can begin again." Beginning is in sit erasing. He closed the ledger, stood slowly, careful as if the floor had risen beneath him. "There sips a service at the Veterans Memorial on Saturday," he said. "They sipped dedicating a new plaque. I could stand there with you." Pride and resentment tempted me to close the door, but I heard my mother Sip's voice. "If he reaches, let him touch the air at least." I nodded. "Okay." Saturday was bright in that Ohio way, the sky trying to apologize for winter. The memorial sat on a small square of grass between the library and post office, a granite wall lined with names steadying the ground beneath it. A few townspeople gathered, Boy Scouts in sashes, a retired teacher with a flag pin, a nurse holding a toddler. The mayor said the expected things without misstep. When the plaque was revealed, an older Marine in dress blues saluted with a trembling hand but steady jaw. We stood at the back. My father had shaved. His tie was quiet. He didn't steer me by the arm. He just stood beside me, as if learning a new sentence. After prayers, men came to shake my hand. He let them. He didn't cut in to translate me into smaller words. Walking back to his truck, he said, "I sep been mean my whole life." "You sep been afraid," I said. "Meanness is just fear dressed for work." He grunted, "You going to fix me now?" "I can set. I can only draw the map. You have to cross the line yourself." We stopped at the tailgate, standing like two people unsure if what they built would hold. He glanced at my hands. "Those rings. I don't know what they mean." "Each one is a story," I said. "None of them are jokes." He nodded, a small bow to a country he hadn't visited, but now recognized. A week later, he came to my house at dusk with a grocery sack of tomatoes. "You got any salt?" he asked, placing them on the counter with a paper towel underneath so they wouldn't stain. Contrition can be grand, or it can be a tomato. We ate standing. He talked about copper prices and a new kid at the shop, who over-tightened a valve and learned humility the hard way. I told him the sparrow had bullied the blue jay. "Huh?" he said. The world had offered us a metaphor, but neither of us felt like working it harder. He didn't say he was proud. That word may never fit his mouth, but he closed the screen door softly when he left. Consideration is a dialect. I'll take it. At church that Sunday, we sat in the same pew. After the service, in the parking lot that had once held my worst humiliations, a man from his bowling league said, "Heard your girl gave a speech at that fancy wedding." My father lifted his chin. "She didn't give a speech. She gave a standard." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. The weather had changed. Maybe the climate too. That afternoon, a card arrived from Jennifer in her neat lawyer's hand. "Thank you for not making me the villain, even when it would have been easy. I'm learning." Inside was a candid photo from the wedding. Me with my glass raised. The light didn't look like a spotlight, more like a window. I set it beside a picture of my mother holding me at 6 months, both of us serious, already practicing how to be seen without asking permission. The house was quiet. I made tea. I let the day end without arguing with it. There would be more conversations, more lines to draw, more tomatoes on counters, more Saturdays spent near granite walls learning not to waste our own names. I didn't need a new father. I needed the old one to stop using me as kindling. He was learning, so was I. By August, the story of that wedding had circled the town. At the diner, people asked about the groomsman, not my dress size. At church, no one called me big girl anymore. They used my name. Respect can arrive late, but it arrives. My father stayed quiet after the memorial. He didn't call, but he didn't vanish either. I'd see his truck at the hardware store, or his figure hunched over a grocery cart. We circled each other carefully, like veterans after a battle not ready to speak of it. The breakthrough came at a cookout in my brother Sep's backyard. Men stood around the grill, trading the same 3 stories. My father came over with a plate, nodded at the wings, and turned to me. "This is my daughter." The old script was possible, but he didn't smirk. He didn't cut me down. He set the plate down and cleared his throat. "She runs things bigger than this grill. She takes care of people. That's all I'll say." It wasn't poetry, but it was enough. Later that night, he stopped by with a jar of pickles. "Figured you might like these," he muttered. It was the closest he came to apology. I accepted. We sat on the porch in silence. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't sound like trumpets. It sounds like 2 people agreeing not to sharpen knives anymore. I share this not to humiliate my father, but to honor what can grow in rocky soil. He was raised in a world where worth was measured by wallets and waistlines. He passed me that yardstick because it was the only one he had. That doesn't erase the damage. Words are hammers. They build or they break. The lesson isn't complicated. Respect your children, even when they don't match the picture in your head, especially then. The body you mock might be carrying a pack over mountains. The quiet child you dismiss might be leading others in ways you'll never see. If you're listening, maybe you're a parent, maybe a grandparent, maybe someone still hearing the echo of cruel words from long ago. Remember this: what you say in public can wound for decades or heal in a moment. You get to choose. As for me, I no longer wait for my father to define my worth. Honor isn't given in introductions. It's lived in how you carry yourself when eyes are on you. Still, I'll admit, he's trying. He calls me by my name now. Sometimes he even smiles. That's its own kind of victory. If you've stayed to the end of this story, I'll ask one thing. Think about your words. Do they lift, or do they weigh down? And if you've been mocked, know this: you're not defined by the laughter of a room. You're defined by the truth that eventually stands beside you. If this story resonated, share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe for more stories like this, reminders that dignity can be reclaimed. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far respect can travel. Because the greatest revenge isn't anger across a table. The greatest revenge is reconciliation lived so fully it teaches others a better way to treat people.